Critical theory started to burn itself out. Even the academic stuff, people just kind of rolled their eyes and got sick of it by the time we got to the 1980s, going into the early 1990s. But a handful of activists, many of whom learned directly from not Marcuse himself, but one of his students, Angela Davis, who's very active with Black Lives Matter today. Many of these people realized that there was a fruitful site of renewing the critical theory school of activism by picking up postmodern theory. So you can see it one way or you can see it the other way, that critical theory picked up postmodern tools, or that postmodernism morphed into a more critical theory mindset. But either way, the observation that brought the two concepts together into a completely new form that we in cynical theories call applied postmodernism, but it is actually the birthplace of wokeism, was that you have to have an awful lot of privilege to deconstruct a site of systemic oppression. Somebody who experiences, who has the lived experience, the lived reality of systemic oppression cannot deconstruct that. You must be privileged to deconstruct that. You can't deconstruct racism because you don't live it. And so now we have a shift. With postmodernism, we've already slipped from the truth to your truth versus my truth, and now we've located that within ideas of systemic oppression that are rooted in race, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, religion, disability status, fat status. You could just go on and on. Even they, the people who promote these theories, get tired of listing all of the different identity statuses. Judith Butler, a very famous queer theorist, the kind of fairy godmother of queer theory, in fact calls it that exasperated etc., when you have to list all of the different identity categories. So all of a sudden now you have your truth as a white person, black person, man, woman, gay, straight, and my truth as a something else. And one of those ideas that they borrowed from Foucault was that those exist in different cultures. Therefore, they exist in different truth regimes. They have different ways of knowing. They have different ways of understanding, and they can't understand one another. They cannot find some objective external standard by which they can settle the difference when your truth and my truth don't agree. They are cultural products and cultural products only. And the critical theory idea stepped into this and said, but there is a way to judge, because systemic oppression is surely wrong. If we want to be charitable. If we want to be uncharitable, we remember that they also said, the critical theorists, that a Marxist revolution can't have just one axis of fighting, or one axis of conflict, say proletariat versus bourgeoisie. It has to have a constellation of axes, say race and gender and sexuality and ability status and fat status and ethnicity and religion. You need multiple dimensions upon which you can fight the conflict theory fight. And so critical theory and postmodernism fused into a new view of power. Power works through everybody. It is systemic. It works at the level of discourses to create systemic oppression. Those oppressions are based in identity categories primarily because identity politics had become the ascendant thing following Marcuse into Davis, into the critical race theorists first, especially Kimberly Crenshaw and Bell Hooks, who were black feminists. That is not to say that there are black women who are feminists, which is also true. It is actually a school of thought. I have to clarify that every time people think I'm saying a thing I'm not saying. There are black feminists who were very concerned about the idea that there are multiple systems of oppression in play when you are a black woman, and they wanted to expound upon this by borrowing ideas that were growing out of queer theory that saw the intersections of oppression across the three things that queer theory is most interested in, which are sex, gender, and sexuality. And so they borrowed these ideas and built this thing that Kimberly Crenshaw laid out and defined as a practice called intersectionality. She defined it first in 1989, and by 1991, she wrote a very famous paper called Mapping the Margins. You want to understand where the margins are, you want to understand what she's talking about. The margins of mapping the margins are, she lists at the beginning of the paper, 1, radical feminism, which she decried as white feminism that was disinterested in black women, and 2, black liberationism, which she said was black male-oriented. And the identity politics around those two things left out black women. That's the point of intersectionality version 1.0. She then proceeds to give a scathing critique in the style of critical race theory of liberalism and liberal values, saying that they are just a way that oppression has been maintained and hidden more successfully, necessitating a critical theory that can make them visible, that can convince people who think that their lives are fair and equal and good, that their lives actually suck, and that they are under the thumb of systemic oppression under the form of white supremacy and patriarchy. Even if they don't realize it, even if they never experience these things themselves, even if they think that this is mostly a relic of the past with maybe some inertial issues and some occasional ignorant jerks here and there. That's not how we're going to think about it anymore. She critiques liberalism. She also critiques postmodernism, and she says that what postmodernism gets wrong is that it's going to deconstruct even those places of systemic oppression. So I'm not making any of this up. I'm not just riffing. She actually says this. She then goes on to assert unapologetically that her mission is to give identity politics first and foremost. She has a very famous paragraph, which she borrowed from Bell Hooks, that says there's something much more important and powerful about the statement, I am black, than I am a person who happens to be black, because the second puts universal humanity in front of the identity. That's what she says. That's where this comes from. That's what intersectionality is about. Put the identity first. It's called identity first politics. And then at the end of the paper, in a paragraph near the end that puts everything I'm saying into clarity of context, she says that for her, intersectionality is a provisional concept linking contemporary politics and postmodern theory. Contemporary politics, of course, are those radical feminism, radical liberationism that she talked about positively throughout the paper while criticizing liberal approaches like the civil rights movement as not doing the job, as actually succeeding, following her mentor, Derek Bell, at hiding racism rather than taking a step toward ending racism. This is the birth of woke. The word wasn't being used then. It was a slang term that appeared here and there before roughly 2008 to 2011, 12. But this is the birthplace of woke. This is the place where something got stuck into deconstructionism that could not be deconstructed, and it is the experience of systemic oppression by identity. So this is the place where we have to start. If we want to understand words like diversity, inclusion, equity, racism, everything, you have to understand that this worldview about power is where they come from. You can't appeal to the facts, you can't appeal to reason, you can't appeal to a reasonable person standard or what a fair-minded person might think. You can't appeal to faith, because those are all applications of power by a means that people don't recognize as an application of power and have fooled themselves into believing are methodologically rigorous or objective or for some other reason legitimate. These are people who have fooled themselves into believing that the power they gave themselves to be authenticators of truth are natural. It is fooling yourself to believe that they are rigorous. It is fooling yourself to believe that they are anything other than a base application of identity politics by other means, in particular, white, Western, often straight, male ways of knowing. And so now we have this cultural relativism that has come out of postmodern thinking, that one culture does not have the necessary epistemic or ethical tools to judge another culture. And we add in the critical theory dichotomy of oppressor versus oppressed that drives back to Marx. And there is now an answer. All the cultural methods of producing knowledge, of producing truth, of speaking, of organizing society, all of them are equal except the one produced by straight white men in Europe under the Enlightenment. That one's bad. That one's wrong.
You've never experienced oppression in your entire fucking life. Neither have I. You're fucking a white male. You're a white man.
Yeah,
I don't want to hear what you have to say.
Oh my gosh.
No, I'm serious.
Susan,
Jim, why do you have an
on.
opinion on this?
Come on, Susan. Susan, this is... I won't say a word.
That's why I like to...
You shouldn't have an opinion on that.
I met with constituents of color, and quite honestly, some of the feedback was that some of this wording was ridiculous.
You have been white from birth. Why are you arguing what is a system of oppression? You've never experienced one.
Okay.
So shut up. I don't want to hear from you. Just stop. Just stop, Dan. Stop, Dino. You are not oppressed. And people in Oak Park are. And we are trying to recognize that as a community. This mayor and this board is obviously not willing to face history. We have a chance to make history. It is time for this community to face equity. Enough. And you stop it. You are a white male.
True.
Stop it. You are a white male. Your skin is light enough. Stop it.
I gotta let.
I think if we reduce these conversations to nobody cares what you have to say because you're a white male, I don't think we're doing this right.
But most bonkers of all are the complacent, often white, often male, MPs who only ever play party politics, the ones who are so obviously out of touch with their constituents and who, worst of all, get away with it under our voting system.